So when you lay out your awnings and you're getting ready to start working on sewing them together, the most important thing to do is we've trimmed the awnings and we have trimmed the lining so they now match, as you can see here. So you put right sides together, and then the objective is really to match up the top. Let me go up here so you can see it a little bit. Is really to match up the top of each of the scallops and pin there. And then once you've got that done properly, then the rest of it all sort of fits in. So I'm going to pin it along here. And then I'm going to pin each of the ends. I am going to, which you don't need to watch, I'm going to go ahead and put in everything I need to do, the elastic, do the corners, do the straps, and once those pieces are done, then I will go ahead and show you how it is that I stitch it together. So first thing to note is I use a 1/2 inch seam as the pattern indicates, but I don't have a 1/2 inch mark on my throat plate, so I actually put a small piece of blue painter's tape on there so that I know where it is I'm supposed to sew along. As you come down to the scallop on the awning, so as you come in, the objective then is to come down so that you think you're about a 1/2 hour from the edge, 1/2 inch from the edge here. The best way to do that is literally to simply take it and turn it, and it sort of sits right along the edge there so you know that you're in the right place. The other thing to do before you start to turn into it and sew is just make sure that your lining, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to you do need to make sure that it is inside where you're about to stitch. So it needs to be within a 1/2 inch. I do like to have it line up fairly decently because that means I won't have a lot of wrinkling on the inside of the window. Anyway, once you've got that, then it's simply a measure of do not stitch through your pins. If you do, you run the risk of the needle hitting them and then breaking and you get projectiles. So be very careful when you're doing that. You just want to be able to stitch up to where you think you're in a good position in terms of where the top, or what I call the divot, or the top of the scallop is, and then turn it back. Make sure again that your lining is underneath your scallop and continue. So pretty simply, we are just going to run right along here. And then the final scallop. Again, as you come over to the edge, you really want to make sure that you're sitting at about a 1/2 inch. I have a lot of experience at this, so I'm pretty good at judging that, and there you go. And then just continue to stitch around the perimeter of the awning. So when you're finished stitching it, then your objective would be to come over and do the trimming. And I trim off the edge of the pieces of the strap as well as the corners. And then what I do on the bottom is on these scallops, you can cut divots in there. On thinner fabric though, that kind of shows through and it doesn't really look as good. So what I end up doing is instead I cut, this is a 1/2 inch seam if you remember. I just gently go along here and cut 1/4 inch. Make sure as you do this that you do not have the other part of the awning underneath there because you run the risk of cutting it if you do, and speaking from experience, it makes for a bad day. So literally going along and just trimming it like this. And then the other thing you'll want to do is just come up and stitch cut right up to the edge of the stitching. And what that does is it allows you to turn that inside out pretty simply. And continue trimming from that standpoint all the way around. I do not trim the side seams. They're straight. They don't really matter. The only real reason I trim the corners so that I can get them to turn in and out properly. And then I trim, put it over here where you can see it. I do trim the bottom of the scallops again as well, so that you can get it to turn inside out pretty quickly. And I will go through that in a few minutes when I show you how I iron it out. Thanks. Okay, the last step that is exclusive to the scallops. So here I have finished 2, and I will show you in a minute how I did that. But what you can see here is that there's just this little bit of fabric that's getting pushed from the front to the back. And the objective here is to make sure so that when you're top stitching along the front of this, when you're finishing it, is that what you always want to have is it's always better to have a little bit of the front fabric showing to the back than it is to have the back showing to the front. So when you're looking at the awnings on the window, you don't want to have the lining sticking out from underneath it. And so the way that I achieve that is, I'll show you as we move on to the next 2 scallops. So kind of have to, excuse me, pull the scallop out. As I did there. And because this fabric is outdoor fabric, it's quite thick. And so what that allows you to do is literally maneuver it with your fingers like this. So you can see what I've done here. So remember, you've trimmed this to a 1/4 inch on the inside. You've put a little clip here at the top of the divot. And so now what you're going to do is literally take your iron, always test your fabric first to make sure the iron won't melt your fabric. It has happened to me. It's not a fun experience, particularly when you're doing it for a client. And then what I do is I set my iron to dry, and the reason I do that is that if you don't, you could end up burning your fingers with all the steam. But I then have a steam boost on my iron, and so I use that to kind of set it. So you can see again here, push that in place. I do a 1/2 of a scallop at a time. If I try to do the whole thing, I find that it just sort of muddies itself. And so then here's the last one. And then I'll show you how I do that corner over there. So again, starting here, want to have just that little bit of fabric sticking out. Keep coming around with the scallop and the fabric in the right places. Don't burn your fingers. And then as you get over here to the corner, what you'll find is that you kind of have to pick it out a little bit. So I use a straight pin to do it. Now be really careful here, particularly this fabric. This is actually a very loose weave fabric. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to end up pulling and having threads sticking out. So what you're going to do is don't just pick up a little bit of fabric. Stick your pin all the way into the seam there and have it lift up that way. And then by doing it that way, what'll happen is you won't just catch a little piece of fabric, which will, excuse me, which could end up basically pulling a loose thread, which is not what you want to do. So now that we pulled that corner out, again, you're going to manipulate it with your fingers as much as you can to push that out there. And then start working your way back up the other side of the awning, like that. And I will just lay this out for you right now. So these are the ones that I just did while I was showing you how that works. And so you can see now what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to do a really nice top stitch when you're finished. You're going to do the top stitch around the edges the same way that I showed you in terms of how to do the stitching on the inside when you're sewing them together. Take it slow and just move that, just have it move around as you're going around, and it'll work great for you. So anyway, so hopefully that has answered all of the questions that you have, and please feel free to reach out directly to me. You can reach me at lisa@shinersview.com, and I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Thank you.